Welcome to Shoe Leather Faith. My name's Robert McMillan and we're starting a new series. It's a continuation of our previous series on disciplining children, but we're talking about adolescents now, teenagers. So we're going to deal with the next step, the next rung up the ladder. Now I'm going to use the words teenager and adolescent interchangeably, but as some of you might know, some children become adolescents before they become teenagers. And some teenagers have a hard time becoming adolescents. And remember that the word adolescent is from a Latin word adolescere, which means to grow up. And your job as a parent now is going to change. Instead of keeping them close and keeping them safe, you're going to start turning them loose, pushing them out of the nest. There's a verse in Deuteronomy chapter 32, verses 11 to 12, and I'd like you to look at that and use that as your memory verse for raising teenagers. As an eagle stirs up its nest, hovers over its young, spreading out its wings, taking them up, carrying them on its wings, so the Lord alone led him, talking about Jacob or Israel, and there was no foreign god with him. That was during their wilderness wanderings. What has that got to do with raising teenagers? Everything. Let me tell you a little biological lesson about eagles. When an eagle sees the eaglet ready to get out of the nest, they start fluttering around, particularly the mother eagle, and she disturbs the eaglet, flutters around, hovering over the nest, as an eagle stirs up its nest. And that's what we are to do as parents of teenagers. We're supposed to stir up the nest so that they're ready to leave. We don't want to kick them out the door. When they turn 18, don't buy them a suitcase and show them where the front door is. I'm telling you that there's a way to prepare our children to be adults who are independent of us and yet still want us in their life. As the eagle stirs up the nest, it slowly drives the baby eaglet out of the nest. As the eagle hovers over the nest, the eaglet slowly but surely jumps out and tries to fly. But yet, the eagle is hovering around just in case that baby eaglet can't fly or doesn't pull it all together at times. And that's what it says, spreading out its wings, taking them up, carrying them on its wings. That's what a mother eagle does. That's what we as parents have to do with our eaglets. We have to teach them to be independent and to fly on their own, and yet we've got to be back there in the background hovering. Not helicoptering, but just hovering to make sure that our kids make it successfully. If you just have small children now, or you have prepubescent children, in other words, they're not reaching puberty yet, realize that you're always going to be a parent. You will die as an old person, as a parent. You will never release your care and concern for those children. They'll always be your children. All of my children are grown up and they're out of the house. They're independent of us, but they're still our children. We're still their parents, and we still pray for them daily. You will never stop being a parent. One of the frightening parts of raising children is to see them become adolescents or teenagers. As they move into adulthood, we parents become more and more panicky because we see our children dancing blithely through a minefield, not seeing the spiritual dangers all around them. And we parents know that we can make better decisions than they can. But our task is to equip them to function as adults without the need for our constant input. We must teach our children to live and survive and thrive among the wolves. We're not to keep them safe forever in the sheepfold. These are the real fears of parents of teenagers. For most Christian parents, however, the fears go beyond just keeping our kids safe from sexually transmitted diseases or drugs. We have concerns about their spiritual commitment to Jesus Christ and His church. Josh McDowell, in his book, The Last Christian Generation, claims that beliefs and behavior of so-called Christian young people is inconsistent, quote, with what the Bible identifies as a true follower of Christ." Unquote. In other words, somehow or other we're dropping the ball. That may have been we didn't get them to Sunday school when they were small, we didn't discipline them properly, but all that can be remedied. It's just hard work for us, and it's going to be hard work for our children, and we're all going to have to depend upon God to work it all out. As we see the constant pull of worldly values and entertainments on our teens, we Christian parents have the tendency to become more restrictive as our teenagers age, rather than less restrictive, pulling our teenagers closer to us rather than turning them loose. We don't want our children to live their whole lives in the nest. As the eagle stirs up her nest, we are to stir up our children's homes so that they desire to go out. As a result of our pulling them closer to our chest and protecting them longer than we should, we can abort their adolescence, their ability to grow up and become adults. Some parents assume that teenagers will basically raise themselves, so they just turn them loose and don't subject them to parental authority. Some do this by default, being too busy at work or commuting in a two-income household. This method might constitute real child abuse. These kids, especially when they're young and before they become adolescents, they need us. Mark Twain wrote that when a child turned 13, you ought to seal him up in a barrel, feed him through the bunghole. When he turns 18, you seal up the bunghole. Well, that's cute as a button, but it's not the best way to raise children. Well, let's define adolescence. What does it mean to be a teenager? And I'm talking biblically. Why are our children adolescents far longer than in most cultures? What did that? I mean, we've got people in their 20s and 30s who are still adolescents. They're still growing up. Well, there's a lot of things you can attribute that to, and we'll get into those things down the line as we continue this series. As I speak, adolescence is encroaching into childhood years as never before. On the other end, it is moving well into the 20s. So they're physically growing up too soon for us, and they're not growing up enough emotionally or psychologically on the other end of it. So we're getting a stretched out adolescence period. So there are plenty of cliche definitions, and very few of them are completely wrong. If you're old enough to have a child, but you better not bring one home to your parents, you're still an adolescent. Okay? If you're constantly being told to act your age, but you don't know exactly what that age is on any given day, you're still an adolescent. If you're old enough to be held accountable by God for your moral actions, but you still need some basic help in negotiating the minefields of life, you're still an adolescent. It's not a bad thing to be an adolescent. This comes the closest to the biblical description of adolescence in Nehemiah chapter 8, verses 1 through 3. Turn there. Nehemiah chapter 8, verses 1 through 3. And look for the people who've been gathered around as Nehemiah had Ezra the scribe read the law. Now all the people gathered together as one man in the open square that was in front of the water gate, and they told Ezra the scribe to bring the book of the law of Moses, which the Lord had commanded Israel. So Ezra the priest brought the law before the assembly of men and women, and all who could hear with understanding on the first day of the 7th month. Oh, don't tell me there's 3 genders. Then he read from it in the open square that was in front of the water gate from morning until noonday, before the men and the women and those who could understand, and the ears of all the people were attentive to the book of the law. After they'd rebuilt the gates and rebuilt the temple and rebuilt the wall, Ezra the scribe was reading to everybody who could understand, and to the men and women. At the reading of the law of Moses, men, women, and those who could understand were gathered together. Now, small children were obviously the group left out, since they are not men or women, nor are they able to understand what would be read to them. But there was that third group, those who were neither men nor women, but could still understand what was being read to them. What was the group considered neither men nor women? teenagers or adolescents. Our children, as they go through adolescence, are no longer children, but they are, by the transitional nature of adolescence, inadequate adults. This produces the potential for self-esteem problems and poor decision-making skills. They need a little help with that, but they don't want to ask for it. They want to do it on their own, but they don't do it well. That's agony for the parent, to stand back and let their kids flutter around as they jump out of the nest. Not only that, but they begin to show the world at large how we did as parents. Let me talk in college terms. When your children are leaving the nest, when they're going out on their own, parent, that's your midterm examination. You know what the final is? When your grandchildren are moving out on their own, that's your final exam. Scary, isn't it? In Proverbs 27:11 it says, "My son, be wise and make my heart glad, that I may answer him who reproaches me." This father is asking his son to act in such a way that his good name will not be damaged by his son's actions or lifestyle. And that's what we're hoping for. Our sons and our daughters to live up to a standard that is honorable and brings honor to us and joy to us. So not only are the kids uptight and nervous about the transition to adulthood, but the parents are uptight and nervous because they're going through their midterm exams as the kids are moving out of the house. Your name and reputation will be carried on in your children. We remember the great warrior of God, Joshua. His father's name was Nun. We also remember Judas Iscariot, whose father's name was Simon. Now, you tell me which dad had reason to be pleased with his son. Well, next time, we're going to continue this series, this new series, and we'll talk about the changes that children undergo as they move through adolescence. Until then, keep praying for your kids, keep loving your kids, and I'll see you next time.